I assume you mean does the root prim itself need to be a skinned mesh that's flagged as an animesh? Is that the idea? There's not any change there currently. Let's see. We have a question for: are there any updates on server-side bakes on mesh? Not really. There's, um, you know, we've got, the first stage is still getting the increased texture resolution deployed as a baking, um, as an update to the baking service, and that seems to be working, but there's QA both to make sure that it works correctly and to understand the performance impact. Before we could deploy that grid wide, we have to make sure that we have enough bake hosts. If it becomes more expensive, then we need more hosts. So we've got to bang on that stuff more. Let's see, what else? Inverse kinematics for Animesh. Yeah, nothing in the works right now. It would, I agree that would be cool. Definitely not going to be any work for that for the project viewer. Let's see. Going a little farther down, it's another question from Lucia about is Animesh still root prim oriented? Is the pelvis av center or bounding box geo center oriented to root? Yeah, currently, what I'm doing is aligning the root joint to the position of the object. Sometimes that gives you good results, and sometimes it doesn't. It may be we should be looking at something like using the bounding box instead. I mentioned we want to do some more tweaking on that before we go to Project Viewer, and so I'm going to explore a couple of other options on that. Yeah, it's nice to have something that works in a kind of a simple and understandable way, like root equals position, but at the same time, it's disturbing when stuff kind of jumps around when you start animating it, or when there's a significant mismatch between the sort of visual location of the thing that is getting played and what the server where the server thinks the object is. You get stuff that's sunk in the ground or up in the air or whatever. So there's I think we're kind of walking a bit of a fine line there between making it kind of simple and understandable and kind of giving a nice result more often. Let's see, what else? Building size being increased. I haven't looked at it recently. I understand that's potentially a concern, but no, I don't think we'd be doing anything new on the size limit before we went to Project Viewer. Basically the goal is to get something out that people can start playing with, because that helps us find bugs, and it also helps us find limits in the use cases. If once we actually got something testable, then people can say, hey, I'm trying to build a flying space hotel, and the size limit is messing me up, or whatever it is they're trying to do. It's easier to have some kind of concrete examples, um, and of course we always have to decide what makes it into the release and what doesn't, so we can get out it, someday actually ship it. Let's see. Will imposter size be increased? Is this a question about the kind of bug where the imposters get rendered in a kind of a cropped way? Um, if that's the question, yeah, I haven't looked at it yet. We really should get a fix in for that sometime. Let's see. Still going down the list. Looking at the list, I see Alexa's here. Hi, Alexa.
Greetings!
Alright, I think I may be somewhat caught up. There's one question. Can you tell us more about Animation Lister? Well, there's an LSL function that lets you list all the animations that are getting played by a given prim. That was one of the wiki pages that we linked to when we started writing some docs on that stuff. Is there a particular question about that?
But is it going to be like an HUD, or it's like going to be a command?
It's an LSL command. So if you're writing a script, you can query the list, and it'll tell you. It actually, what it tells you is the names of the objects in your inventory. You know, the animations in your inventory that are being played. So then you can use that information to stop them if you want, or make some other behavior based on the fact that a particular one is playing.
Veer, I have a request. I understand you're going to be leaving soon, so I hope nobody's going to kill me here, because this is not much about Animesh, but I really thought it's been requested for very long to upgrade the inventory in Second Life. Yes? So I thought, like, if you're coming out with this project, and we're going to have so much, you have the lister, but they building something complex with Animesh and animation is going to make it even longer to make projects in Second Life. So I thought, if I can beg you on my knees, if you can really get to get an inventory for Second Life that is upgraded, or at least that you can have folders in Windows style, so that you can organize stuff better, because this is crazy how it is in this moment.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly things that could be done with inventory. Obviously it's not part of the Animesh project. What particular things are you thinking about? I mean, you do have folders,
I would think by logic to request two simple things. One, you have like a tab that, it's like a floater window, okay? One that to be called as desktop, so that we can have everything we're working on at the moment dropped in there, okay? And the second one, which I think is more important, is, now when you put folders, you can put folders in folders, but they stack vertically only, okay? So like, on any regular Windows computer, like you can stack them with different layouts. You understand what I mean? So like I could make a project, let's say, I don't know, of Spider Avatar version 1, and then I can put the folder inside with all the textures, all the animations, all this, but they're not going to be stacked vertically, but they're going to be stacked,
you're talking about just having a layout where you can have a bunch of folders.
Yeah, like in Windows, when you open, when you're browsing all your content on your hard drives, you can see them vertically and also on the side. I think it could, to me personally, because I'm doing a little more complex things, like the assembly of what I'm doing is really huge and massive. It could maybe take down my time and by 10 times and reduce making mistakes, because a lot is with scripts too, So maybe you want to copy or make a new iteration of a script or make corrections, and you after one afternoon you're working on something that you're debugging, or this, it gets a mess very fast. So I was thinking like a desktop and a different organization of the inventory. And I think like if you're coming with this new release, maybe you can take it up with the guys in Linden Lab, like to say, let's bring Animesh with an upgraded inventory.
I think that kind of falls out of scope for what we're working on right now.
Yeah, it doesn't fit within the framework for Animesh, but obviously we do revisit other aspects of Second Life over time. Animesh isn't the only project that's going on, and this isn't specifically an Animesh meeting. It's just that's the biggest thing we've been talking about recently. So it's certainly reasonable to propose it, and if we had a Jira, excuse me, just a second. If we had a Jira that gave a description of specifically what functionality you're looking for, that would also be helpful. But there's, as Alexa says, it's probably not the sort of thing that we could be tackling in in the near term. It's really not logically part of Animesh, and it's also it would also just be a big project that would affect the time frame a lot. Hey Alexa, anything you want to say? I mentioned that you'd been looking into the pathfinding stuff a bit, but
Yeah, you want me to share
if you want to talk about that or anything else you're up to, be happy to hear about it.
Drop you guys a couple of gifts to show you some fun, since you like those. Dan was working, make sure I got the right one. Dan has been working with Animesh and pathfinding, so he did this little beauty. And we continue to work with it. After last week when I was talking about my dancing, yes, the dancing bears, I made you guys a little gif of my bear army that I test with. I haven't gotten to surfing yet. I'll have to find a good surfing animation. I've actually been playing around with ice skating a little bit, actually. I have to think about, so many regions like to do holiday changes, and will change out their decor and their look and their activities and all the fun things you could do with having creatures, ice skating across lakes, snowballs, you name it. I mean, this is such an exciting project because I know all of the different ways all of you will come up to, with ideas to play with it, to create experiences, to create ambiance. It's just amazing. Lex Platt, I will talk to Mass Dogs about making a bear.
Yeah, those bears are very cool. And of course, as we were commenting, you'll have to have Animesh Linden bears now.
Yeah, I think that was about 100 of them, and yeah, the fact that they're clipping in the land was more me not having the time to reposition them quick enough to get a video for you guys, just because I had taken down a bunch of stuff and was trying to put the bears back up. So that was me, creator error.
When are we gonna test something like this, like with 20, 30 clients on a single sim, do you think?
Yeah, once we have, once we have a project viewer, we'll also have some test regions so people will be able to go and, make these things. There's a sort of a trade-off between doing stress testing and just making it impossible for anybody to do anything else in the region. So we'll kind of have to strike a balance there. I'm sure there'll be some auto-return policy and that sort of thing, but it'll be one thing we'll want to look at. The performance is interesting. I mean, one thing you can see here is that just having a lot of skeletons isn't that expensive. We've tested with hundreds of these things, and each one is its own. It has its own copy of the skeleton being animated, and that seems to keep up okay. How much are we benefiting from the fact that these guys are all using the same, the same mesh ID? There's a lot of content that probably isn't getting duplicated. That may help. Another thing that's making a big difference here is that, these are reasonably efficient models. That we're talking about a few thousand polys. If you're talking about trying to implement something that could support these multi-million poly Avatars, you'd be talking about, you know, a whole different level of performance, and you know, that's almost certainly one of the things, not even almost, certainly one of the things we're going to have some constraints on with Animesh is just the sheer complexity of models. You know, you're not going to be able to make a million poly Animesh model, and you know, if you could, then it would destroy the grid. So you know, we don't know exactly what the limit's going to be, but it's pretty clear that there's a lot of benefits to keeping it down to something halfway reasonable.
If you just think about a sim in terms of like animals that you would have, if you had 3 or 4 animals and each avatar would probably have something like 30 animations that it would be cycling through between the face and body and everything, it would add up pretty quick.
Yep.
I don't think the animations themselves are a big burden at all. I think there could be hundreds of animations and you wouldn't notice much of a difference of impact.
Yeah, I think that's certainly one thing you can see from the tests here is that, you know, each of these guys has its own animation information. It's playing separately. You know, because of the way we implemented the test, they're running the same animations, but I don't really think we're gaining anything performance-wise from that. I think if you had scripts where each script was running a different animation, you'd see a similar performance profile there. Let's see, question about imposters or comment that we need to support imposters. Yeah, we do need to support imposters. I think when we're probably not going to look at imposter behavior specifically before we go to Project Viewer. You're probably going to get whatever happens by default, given that these things are being treated as kind of quasi-avatars. But I think that is something we're going to need to look at before release.
Alexa, do you remember how many polys was each bear, more or less?
Yep, sorry. I don't. I will need to take a look at it, and at some point I'm going to go through the library avatars and start constructing them, because I have to drag out the body, drag out the pants, drag out the shirt, attach everything. But getting them completely built out so that I can do a mixed army with all the different avatars I can. Gonna be ugly looking.
I think it would be neat though. Yeah, I've looked at the triangle count for some of the objects. I don't remember what it was for bears. I think a lot of the models we have kicking around are in the sort of mid-thousands, you know, 4,000 or 5,000 triangles. So you know, I wouldn't be surprised if the bears are somewhere in that range too, or maybe a little less. There was a comment about something needs to be done before release, before it's used to grief. I'm not sure if I have the context on that. What was the particular griefing concern there? Let's see. Question on how do you file a JIRA? We do have a page about that someplace.
I can pull it up.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think VirMesh has a nice ring to it.
It's a good thing we didn't call it animated objects, because the whole Sansar thing with animated objects. I mean, that's what animated objects are.
Yeah, you know, I like the name animated objects because I think it's kind of unambiguous, but it takes a long time to type. Yeah,
It's nice
there was
where
a
you
question
come
about
with.
kind of where stuff is documented. There isn't an Animesh page now. We will have more, you know, online stuff that we can point you at before, you know, before we cut this loose for testing. You know, project viewers you can always find on the downloads page. I think it's secondlife.com/downloads. So, you know, that'll let you find all of the currently available project viewers as well as release candidates and so forth. But we will also have some way to look up information that's specific to Animesh that'll tell you, you know, what the process is for using it and what, and you know, have links to the whatever sample content we have available. Lucia asks about scripted rigging of sitters and legacy content. Let's see, you're talking about trying to get kind of like pseudo attachments, like trying to get static objects to act like attachments on Animesh and that sort of thing. Bug 10684 or whatever. It's a bad sign if I know the number. No, wait, you're talking about something else. Just a second. Yeah, I think that's still in the category of, you know, things we may think about. It's definitely not for Project Viewer. I think it's relatively unlikely that it would be in the final release either. You know, as we mentioned, we are likely going to do a follow-on project to give you more NPC-like functionality. So this would, you know, would certainly fall into that bucket as a possibility as well if we didn't do it sooner. But yeah, I can't say anything definite about the time frame, except it's definitely not going to be for Project Viewer.
Veer, once all of this is gonna be done and finished, is it possible to keep the project alive, like for further evolution in time?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, there probably will be a follow-on project we've talked about before, where, you know, the initial release for Animesh supports this kind of object-based thing, where, you know, one link set is one skeleton. It can play animations. You know, it's fairly limited scope. The follow-on would be to make it easier to do more NPC-like things, so that you could do things like baking textures to be applied onto Animesh objects, or and supporting the other kinds of controls you have today for avatars, like sliders and so forth. You wouldn't necessarily be using the slider UI, but at least you'd be able to put in shapes and that sort of thing, so that you could customize your Animesh objects better. That's something that we're hoping to get to in a follow-on project, but it's not going to be part of the initial Animesh release.
Do you think you could maybe set up a beta forum like it was made for Sensor for Animesh? I think it would be a good idea.
Yeah, when we did Bento, we had a forum thread. Eventually it got kind of big, but anyway, that was a place where people could have discussions about their experiences. We did monitor that, and I think we'll probably do something similar with Animesh. There will be a place that people can post questions and comments and discuss their experiences. Let's see, there's a question about trying to have more meetings. Yeah, I don't know. I think we'll probably stick with one content creators meeting for now. This subject matter obviously drifts over time depending on what we're more active with. Right now, Animesh and a couple of other things are the hot topics, but it's going to change over time. I think trying to kind of separate it out by different topic categories would be hard, and it would just also be more overhead to try to stay on top of that for everybody.
How far do you think we are from texture baking, viewer?
That's kind of a tough question. I think I think just getting the latest update to the baking service, is something that's kind of in sight. But beyond that, I think there's going to be some discussions around priorities. We are concerned about the texture baking, bakes on mesh, which incidentally would be one of the prerequisites for doing this kind of NPC follow-on for Animesh as well. We're still interested in that, but there have been some other projects that are getting discussed internally too. So exactly how the sequencing is going to work on that, I think, is still kind of TBD.
Let's vote.
I have a question, as I don't script. If you have, let's say, a vehicle that has its moving parts governed by script, yeah, and instead you replace this with Animesh, you would still need some scripts to trigger. Which of the two solutions do you think would be more efficient for a vehicle?
It probably depends on the vehicle, and what kind of behavior you're trying to, implement. Generally, once you get into fairly complex motions, it gets inefficient and tricky to simulate those through things like alpha swapping, which is kind of the standard way to create the appearance of animation in a non-rigged mesh today. So I think once you get to a certain complexity level, Animesh is likely to be the simplest solution, but I'm sure it's going to depend on the exact cases. Let's see what else. Question about is there an update on Experience's Windlight? This is the EAP project, you mean?
Yeah, that would be EAP.
Ah, right. You're here. Any update?
I'm hiding in the back. No real update. I continue to have a few fires that require stamping out. I do have a viewer that almost works with the new settings objects client side. We're still a ways out. We're still a ways out from the script. The first thing that people will see is actual settings objects that they can keep in their inventory, and that could be directly applied. So that you will see before you see the experience scripts.
And this is going to involve both viewer and server updates, right?
Yes.
Let's see, there's a question about preventing people from wearing 25 Animesh attachments. Yeah, I mentioned earlier that that's one of the things we'll likely be doing before we go out to Project Viewer is to impose some limits. There's already limits on attachments that are enforced on the server. If you try to wear more than, I think it's 41 attachments, it won't let you. So, we can also look at what types of attachments they are and, set a limit of, how many Animesh attachments you can have, as well as what your global total is. So, there'll be some limit that if you try to exceed it, then you'll just get a message that says no, sorry, or the UI just will be grayed out and won't let you try it. Yeah, I really wouldn't recommend 41 Animesh attachments except for testing purposes.
So 41 mesh attachments for Animesh would be even for a vehicle, or you're talking about like an avatar?
This is for attaching things to avatars, right? Like having an Animesh pet that you're holding or something like that. Or a vehicle wouldn't be something you're holding, I don't think. That would be something that you're sitting on typically. Lucia asks if there's going to be a function to change the orientation of the skeleton. Conceivably, I'm hoping to come up with a reasonable default behavior so that if you get something reasonable by default, and if you don't like it, then you can just edit the attachment and tweak its position and rotation. But if there's some reason that doesn't work or doesn't work in enough cases, we might look into some some additional LSL for that.
So, if I understand correctly, let's say I wanted to make a sliding door animated by Animesh, yeah? I can either make one that wouldn't be linked to the building, or if I link it to the building, then the animation must be, rigged in a way that it considers where the root prim of the building will be, right?
Yeah. So your question is kind of how to get the door that's animated to line up with the rest of the building that's static.
Yeah, I would assume there could be two methods. It could be the simple
Yeah.
one, which I simply build the house and then I place the door, and the door is rigged by itself to itself, so it's not linked. But then I was thinking, in the case of door that is linked, I would assume then the reference point would be the center of the root frame.
Yeah. You of course you can always edit the position and orientation of any prim. So, if you've got an animated door that doesn't line up the way you want, you can edit that. That said, I think that using Animesh for something that just slides back and forth would probably be overkill. I mean, you can already animate. It's not really animation in that sense, but you can change the position of objects using LSL already. You don't have to just do skinning for something that's that's that straightforward. Somebody asked where the number 41 for attachments came from. I'm not positive the number is 41, but where it came from was that originally there was a certain set of attachment points in the skeleton, and you could have one, and there was a limit. You could only have one attachment on each point. And then we opened it up to say, well, okay, you can have as many on each point as you want, but the total can't be larger than it used to be. So, whatever the number of attachment points we had at the time then became the global limit for how many attachments you can have. Maybe it's not 41, maybe it's 38. Anyway, there's a limit that's that's the history of it. Yeah, so the limit at the total number of attachments isn't going to change, but there's probably going to be a limit, a smaller limit for Animesh attachments. You probably aren't going to be able to have more than one or two Animesh objects on you at a time. 5? No, probably not 5. As I say, we don't know the final numbers, but when the project viewer comes out, there will be some limit. We'll kind of see how it flies in testing once people get a chance to play with it.
If it was 5, that would be 6 total skeletons you'd be walking around with. So, bento skeletons.
One on each finger of each hand.
Oh, I did read that long post that was in the chat there, something about wanting multiple UV maps for a mesh.
Multiple UV maps. So explain what the context is for that. The idea is you've got some kind of a complex face and you want it to correspond to more than one kind of set of texture coordinates?
Yeah, I can only guess. I've heard avatar designers talk about this with the default female, because they want to use their better UV maps versus the Second Life UV map, but they want to have both.
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly how that would work in practice. Is it like different UVs side by side, or is it like they're one on top of the other and you have to decide which one you're using for a given texture?
I think it's Lilith talking in chat about it. Oh, I think it's Lilith talking in chat about it.
Yeah, I'm not confident that I understand the request enough to really comment on it. You know, generally I know there's a lot of interest in extending the kind of graphics pipeline capabilities in various ways. You know, we don't really have the resources to tackle that kind of thing in the near term, but it's certainly something we're interested in, and we'll you know, be keeping an eye on that kind of thing as a possibility, you know, farther down the line.
You should maybe, if you have colleagues, do meet, follow, working on sensor. I heard they were talking about UDIM UV mapping, so maybe you could relate the same thing for Second Life.
Okay, I'll take a look at that. Yeah, Sansar and SL are definitely different code bases. There's not any kind of simple way that one can take advantage of the capabilities of the other, but you can certainly, you know, share knowledge.
Yeah, but the UV technology is the same, so maybe you don't work double, or you can help each other if you're gonna get into this.
All right. Well, if I'll take a look at your description after the meeting. I'm just trying to stay on top of the chat here right now. Polycell, do you mean the alpha rendering issues related to the multiple UV maps, or the alpha rendering issues related to having multiple layers of meshes? Yeah, well, yeah, Z fighting is bad, and having to have lots of layers of meshes is obviously bad on multiple levels, so to speak. And that's one of the reasons that we've got the Bakes on Mesh project already in the pipeline to try to address some of those concerns. But you know, that doesn't give you multiple UV maps that you're talking about here. All right. Well, I guess the short answer is, you know, we don't have any near-term plans to you know, tackle these kinds of you know, graphics pipeline issues. You know, material settings. I certainly understand why they could be a good thing to have, but and as usual, it helps to have a concrete JIRA proposal that describes this in some detail. rather than just we talked about it as a meeting. So if someone else to file that or give me a pointer to something that's already there, that would be good. I guess we're just about at time. Do you have any questions on other topics before we wrap up? People want to talk about Animesh stuff or Bakes on Mesh stuff or EAP stuff or anything else?
Do we have an ETA on the Animesh viewer?
Just the usual, as soon as possible. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think there's a ton of additional things we need to get done. We're not trying to solve every problem before we go to project viewer. So, I'm hopeful it will be more on the sooner side than the later side. But that's still not a specific date, of course.
I'll tell everyone it's all your fault. We're waiting on you.
Shucks, I was trying to keep it a secret.
Veer, I want to personally thank you because you, to me, and I think to everyone, you really give an impression you're working really hard on this.
Oh, well, thanks. I mean, it's a significant project, but I think there's going to be some real benefits for people, so we're looking forward to getting it out there. And yes, we will have adult test regions. We've had quite a few requests for that over the last few meetings as well. All right. Well, I guess that's a wrap for today. Thanks, everybody. Glad we got a chance to chat. I believe we are scheduled to meet next week, and we can have the latest discussion of why I don't have a definite date for the project viewer. Bye, folks.
Thanks, Veer.